Great. All questions will hold until the end of the presentation. You see the wireless mic here in the middle of the room. We'll wait and have you come up one at a time to ask your questions. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's a little bit after 1, so we're going to try and stay on schedule. And it is a pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for this session, Steve Suder, who has nearly 25 years of transportation and environmental planning experience covering a range of local, regional, state, and federal government positions. Steve is the National Program Coordinator for the Refuge Systems Transportation Program, and he oversees the planning and programming of transportation improvements across the 8 Fish and Wildlife Service regions. Prior to joining the Fish and Wildlife Service, Steve was a planning team leader with the Highway Administration's Eastern Federal Lands and Executive Director of the Center Regional Planning Commission in the State College, Pennsylvania area. Steve holds a BS degree in geosciences from Penn State University and a master's in urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia. Please give Steve a big hand.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come here this afternoon. I'm going to get things teed up here for us, and I'm actually going to go through a few of the initial slides myself. But to get going, I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce the panel. I think we're going to do it all at once here, just so you know who's going to be talking to you instead of interrupting it as we go ahead. So we're going to go right down the line here. To my right is Jeff Mass. Jeff is the Region 5 Transportation Program Coordinator located in Hadley, Massachusetts. Prior to joining Fish and Wildlife, he was the Transportation Program Manager for the Bennington County Regional Planning Commission in southwestern Vermont. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the Colorado State University and a master's degree in city and regional planning from that other ACC school in the Southwest called Clemson, and is currently working on his doctorate degree at Valdosta State University. Next down the line is Nathan Caldwell. Nathan works with me in the Washington office in Arlington. He has been since 2004 Fish and Wildlife Service Trails, Byways, Transportation Enhancements, and Alternative Transportation Systems Coordinator. And he is in the Visitor Services branch like I am. Prior to coming to the national office, he was the Transportation Coordinator for the Pacific West region, which is our Region 1, located in Portland, Oregon. And then prior to that, held various positions at wildlife refuges and complexes in Oregon, Hawaii, California, and Oklahoma as a park ranger, outdoor recreation planner. Earlier on in 1987, he joined the Department of Interior as a seasonal law enforcement ranger on the north rim of the Grand Canyon National Park. And that's a place that has some transportation problems, let's say. And then prior to coming to DOI, he had a career as a YMCA Youth Program Director, and at San Diego State did some instruction work for English as a second language. Next down the line is Gary Werner. Gary Werner is not a federal government employee. He's here as one of our partners. Gary has served since 1991, first as chair and now as executive director of the Partnership for the National Trails System. This partnership is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization, federation of 35 trail organizations supporting the 30 national scenic and historic trails. The partnership now works with Congress, the National Park Service, the Forest Service, BLM, us, Federal Highway Administration, to secure adequate funding, administrative support, and authorities for the national trail system. So he's a big advocate and supporter of certain aspects of the transportation system. Gary actually lives in Madison, Wisconsin, so he had a very short trip to get here.
We didn't have to pay him per diem.
We didn't. Yeah, he's a deal for us today, for sure. And Gary represents the partnership in working with federal agency staff and nonprofits to develop the national trails policy initiatives and so forth. And last but certainly not least is Roxanne Bash. Roxanne hails from the state of Alaska, where she worked for the Alaska Department of Transportation and with local governments to find creative solutions to unique transportation problems in that area. She now works at Western Federal Lands. That's a group of the Federal Highway Administration located in Vancouver, Washington. And there she's helping us with various transportation planning needs and assessments and evaluations at the regional level and at the national level. And it's not just with us, with the National Park Service, the Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. So with that sort of introduction of all the speakers, hopefully you could all take that in, but we'll be around afterward if you want to talk to any of us. I'm going to go on to the next slide, just to give you an idea of what we're going to try to cover today. I'm going to have, each of us are going to speak for about 5 or so minutes, maybe a little bit longer for a few of us, to give you a short overview of what we do, what our programs are, what we do maybe on a daily basis, what we do looking to the future as well. Then we're going to have a break, and some of the materials in front of you relate to that. We have a survey that we'd like you to fill out when you have a chance. As we go through this, at the break, we do want to collect it, so we will have a pause, so we have a few minutes for you. And we've also given you a few tickets. The green tickets are not drink tickets. They're not going to help you in any other way. So don't pick up the extras that are laying around. But we're going to play a priority game, so to speak, and we're going to ask you to deposit those tickets to set some priorities across some transportation improvements that we're going to display for you. Then we're going to regroup and get back into some more details, a little more depth on how projects get selected that move ahead in the transportation program in the refuge system. We're going to talk about partnerships with Gary and Nathan, and then a little bit about funding sources also with Nathan and a few of us here. Then we're going to close that out. We're going to report the findings from your survey, at least on a couple items, certainly the ticket game. Let you know what we found out from that exercise. And then we'll have a chance for questions and discussion before we move ahead. Before I go to the next slide, just if we've had a few more people come in, just make sure you come up to where we had those tickets, if you don't mind. And just to get a sense for who's in the room. How many people are here from friends groups or partners and so forth? Wow, great. Thank you very much. And then from region office or, from the region office or national office? Okay, a few folks. And then from the refuge staff, field staff? Okay, pretty much everybody else. I don't think I missed anybody. Great. Gives us a sense for, it's a good mix of people, it appears, that we have for the session here. All right, I'm going to indulge you all just for a few minutes here. Talk a little bit about what I would call the mobility cycle of life. And it definitely starts early. That is a picture of me. Several of the panelists here today have said I still look like that, the cuteness and the resemblance is still there. But it starts early, and you're moved around by others, basically. I mean, until you learn to crawl and other things, people pick you up and place you there. And I can tell you, I can still feel the vinylness of that sofa still today. And then after that, you continue to crawl and you eventually stand up, and then you're walking and you're mobile and you're moving around. And I grew up in Pennsylvania, in central Pennsylvania. So what that means, at a very early age, you go hunting and you bag your first buck, which I did at the age of 5. No, I'm kidding. But I'm not exaggerating that hunting is very important in Pennsylvania. So moving on from that, as you get older, you get out in the communities, you're more mobile, you might be bicycle riding, scootering. At least I hope a lot of those activities still go on today with today's youth. My son is very active and is out there always doing that. But I'm concerned about what I hear about it, childhood obesity and other things like that. Then comes the age of auto driving, which is the excitement of getting out in the open road. Of course, that's available to everyone if you can afford it. And if you can't afford it, then you need to look for other alternatives to get around, whether it's walking, bicycling, transit, buses, and so forth. After that, continuing that driving life, things tend to slow down. And during the discussions this week, we've learned that, and through data from other scientific work, that the younger generations today may not live as long as the current generations are in the future. And that's concerning from the standpoint of mobility, but it's also interesting to study from the standpoint of what transportation needs will be there in the future. And the current vision document does highlight mobility for people, elderly people, and people with disabilities. And it's something that our program will be looking at carefully in the future. And then you continue to need more aids for travel and movement. Eventually, then someone else has to help you move you again as an elderly person if you live that long. And that's the case of my mother-in-law. Actually had an accident this past week, fell down and broke her leg, and her mobility may be restricted now very much in the future. And so the purpose of going through this was to have a little fun, but to really stress how much transportation permeates our lives. It's interesting, you know, in my jobs over the years, those various levels of government, how much people talk about transportation. How was your commute today? Oh, it was terrible. You know, I did this and this and this. And frankly, I just stand back and chuckle. It's like, this is job security, yippee. But it is amazing how much transportation permeates our lives, and it's just incredible, and it will continue to be incredible. And we continue to be a very mobile society, and I think that'll continue to happen. But transportation is a big part of the refuge system. It's a big part of the asset inventory that we have. It's 39% of all the constructed assets. So roads, bridges, and trails in number are 39% compared to the total for buildings, dikes, dams, those other constructed facilities that we operate in the refuge system. It's also a big value to replace them. It's 49% of the replacement value of those assets. And it's 58% deferred maintenance cost. Deferred maintenance is the maintenance that you cannot get done, that needs to be done on an asset. You can't get it done in that given year. And then it's calculated in that next year as something you haven't gotten done. And that's the deferred maintenance that piles up over the years. And that's basically a big piece of that is the road system and transportation system and trails and bridges. The refuge system today has, of the 553 refuges, about 350 actually have transportation or roads and bridges and trails assets in them that are open to the public. So the rest of them either have administrative roads and other ways that we have to get around for operations, or they're not open to the public at all. Most of the public roads that we have, the 5,000-mile inventory, 90% are dirt or gravel. And that presents other challenges looking at future improvements. We also have very many small parking areas. There's about 5,000 parking areas in the system. Obviously, at visitor centers, many of those are paved, but many of them are small pull-offs or parking areas for fishing or hunting places. We have 16, the term I'll use, alternative transportation systems in the refuge system today. And that term means some other way to get people around a refuge other than their personal car. So a bus, a tram, a trailer that a tractor may pull. We would consider that an alternative transportation system. Alternative is a bad word. I mean, this panel and hopefully many of you will view any way to get around a refuge or any way you get around personally as just transportation. There's no such thing as something alternative. And then we have a trail system that we inventoried a few years ago that Nathan spearheaded, and we found out we have about 1,400 miles of trails that lead to various attractions in the system. We're also working with U.S. Geological Survey with a visitor survey that you may have heard about here this week. It's looking at 53 refuges nationwide, and in that survey results, it's telling us that most of the people get to the refuges by either personal knowledge, they've been there before. Many of the friends that are here, I'm sure, would, if they filled out the survey, noted that. Or they may be driving by and see a sign. So signs on surrounding roads are very important to orienting visitors to our refuges. The questions also ask whether they were open to riding a bus or using bicycles or whatever on the refuge system, and there is some general openness to that, looking into the future. And that they also noted that transportation is very important to them, both from the standpoint of importance to the refuge itself, and then are they satisfied with what we're doing out there. The general theme is they are satisfied, but we know there's work to do. And we're just getting preliminary results from this right now. So what I've tried to summarize here briefly is from about 2,500 responses nationwide. Now, the program that I manage in the national office is called Refuge Roads, and it's an authorized program in the transportation or highway bill that you hear being discussed. And right now, we receive $29 million a year. And the highway bill actually expired in September of 2009, and we've been on extensions of that bill since then. So the current funding levels have been extended into future years. There's much uncertainty about the future, about transportation funding. Congress and the House of Representatives just put together a package in the last couple of weeks, put it out for discussion and review. Unfortunately, the details yet have not surfaced on that, so we don't know really the status of our program. We don't know the status of some of the federal lands programs. But we'll be monitoring that closely looking ahead. We are the smallest program in that system. National Park Service gets money for their park roads and parkways. There's some forest highway funds that are out there as well. We distribute those funds to the 8 regions in Fish and Wildlife by a formula. So it's based on visitation, the type of roads that they have in that region, and their condition. And that's as amount of detail as I want to get into that. It's actually a rather complicated formula. But that's how the money gets out to the regions, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that here looking ahead. But it's important to note we're not building new roads with that funds. We're only maintaining existing roads, trails, or bridges. In the future, the law or policy may change where it'll give us more flexibility to use money for environmental aspects, but it may also allow us to consider new roads too, where they make sense. And more importantly, this program is a big amount of money for the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's not even a rounding error, as I would call it, for the bigger transportation, $43 billion nationwide. But it gets us the entry into the transportation world, and we're a player for other funds, and we can use that funds, and we're going to talk about it. Just real quick, these are the regional coordinators that we work with. These are the people I work with almost on a weekly basis. These are your friends. These are the people who are on the ground working with refuges and stations to see transportation improvements ahead. And then through your regional friends, you have connections to people like Roxanne and other Federal Highway Administration divisions who can help with technical assistance, but with also planning, organization, and moving improvements ahead. So with that introduction from me, all of us are going to go through with some introductory slides. We're going to have the pause, and we're going to do the surveys and tickets. So Jeff, now coming to the podium, Jeff Mast.
Thank you, Steve. All right, folks. My role here is to sort of give you the impression from the regional perspective as to how our program works at the Northeast region. And welcome to the Northeast region. So we have 13 states. Each one of those states has multiple refuges, 73 stations, roughly 622 miles of road. So we have a lot of road in the Northeast region. 215 miles of that are public use. And so public use for us means that it's open at least 6 months out of the year. To give you a little more sort of feeling as to how those roads break out and their condition and their type. You can see with our public use roads, we have about 3/4 of them being gravel roads, and about 1/4 is paved. With the administrative roads, it's a bit different picture. We have about 50% gravel, and about 1/3 of it is native. Now, a lot of those native roads are actually what we consider trails, just to give you a sort of idea about that. Now, for the Northeast region, we get about $1.7 million a year. That comes out of the $29 million that Steve was referring to earlier, and it's figured out by formula. So other regions get more, some regions get less, depending on how that breaks out. We spend that money on maintaining our public use roads, parking structures, and trails. And $1.7 million for our public use infrastructure is not a lot of money. I mean, public use, we have 215 miles worth of roads. And so when you consider how that thins out as you spread it across the system, that's not a lot. And so because of that, we have to look for other funding sources. And so we look out for the Transportation Enhancements Program, the Sarbanes Program, high priority projects, which were in the 2005 Transportation Bill, and then things like scenic byways and recreation trails, just however we can leverage funds. And Nathan's going to talk more about that in a bit, so I'll move along. Now, the way that we break out that $1.7 million each year is through our work program. Right now, the work program that we're working under is for 2011 through 2015, and basically what it does is it takes each of those years and says how we're going to spend those funds. So, for the most part, because we want to peg that $1.7 million as close as we can, it's really a balancing process. So, because we only have $1.7 million, we can only afford to do 2 or 3 larger projects per year. When I say larger project, I basically mean like an entrance road or some sort of primary road system project. And in the second half of the presentation, I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of those. And so the way that we work with the larger projects is that we work with a partner who's Eastern Federal Lands. We have Roxanne at the end here who's from Western Federal Lands. And so my counterparts on the Western Seaboard work with her. For me, I work with the Eastern folks who are in Arlington, Virginia. Or excuse me, they're in Sterling, Virginia. And so basically using them to go through the process, it takes about 2 or 4 years, 2 to 4 years, for the entire process to play out. And so that's preliminary engineering for the first year, probably for the second, depending on the size of the project, and then going through construction and contract engineering. For smaller projects, we can generally do that in-house. And we do have engineering staff. We have abilities with small parking lots and things along those lines to try to handle them as best we can. And then also we do comprehensive transportation planning in support of the CCPs, the Coordinated Conservation Plans. When they are going through that process, transportation issues come up, and it's a great way for us to partner with them and try to figure out for us future projects within the transportation system, and for them ways they can fine-tune the CCP. So it sort of helps everybody out. And then also we do project scoping. In order to figure out what projects need to come into the program down the road, we go out with some of our partners from Eastern Federal Lands, and we take a close look at the road and figure out what a preliminary cost estimate would be, because one of the major factors for figuring out how we can fit things into our budget will be that cost. So 2 questions I get asked a lot, surprisingly a lot, is who do I work for and who do I interact with? Just to give you an idea, this picture right here, that's me on the bottom right, in case you couldn't tell. Been transformed into an 8-year-old volunteer at a refuge. And then the other guy is one of our engineers at Region 5, Duncan Creaser. So I work within the Division of Refuges, and specifically I work for the Visitor Services Branch Chief. And basically, working in refuges at Region 5, we have people who are specialized in different areas. And so really, it's collaborative. We've got to work together on all these projects. And so transportation, we work with the archaeologists, one of which is in the room. Tim, you can raise your hand. And we work with the engineers. We work with everybody to try to get these projects done because we each bring something different to the table. We also work very closely with the refuge staff. Every refuge has different transportation issues, and we try to deal with them as best we can and find ways that we can overcome those issues and move along the transportation program for Region 5. The Washington office personnel, Steve and Nathan, who are both sitting up here, are great helps when we need them. And Eastern Federal Lands, we work very closely with them. We talk on basically a weekly basis and figure out how we're going to get our larger projects moving smoothly. And then the friends groups, I throw that in there because we talk periodically, but it's something that's really we can improve on, because there are grant opportunities out there that Nathan's going to talk about, and we're here to help with that as best we can because it strengthens the transportation system for our region, and that's what we want to do. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Nathan.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Jeff's one of our newer guys. We really appreciate having him. He's very active and really working hard for that region and the transportation system in general. I'm Nathan Caldwell, and I like to talk about why the transportation system is much more than the Refuge Roads program. In 1998, when the program was established, and we really got the money going in 99, and I started in 2000 out in regional office, what we found is Back then, it was $20 million, now it's $29 million. For us, it's a lot of money. As we said, in the larger transportation world, I mean, it isn't really a rounding error. You won't even get a good interchange for $29 million in a lot of places. But what it really got us was an entry point into the larger transportation world. And it is a large world. And as Steve pointed out, it goes into all of our lives in a lot of different ways, especially in the refuge system. And we have a whole suite of transportation funds and modes available. And as Steve pointed out, I don't like to call it alternative transportation, because if you look at it, bicyclists were the first people advocated for paved roads. That's where the good road movement came from the League of American Bicyclists back in the 1880s. We've been, riding bicycles, we've been taking trams, we've been taking trains a lot longer than we've been driving, but now we're alternative transportation. So I just like to refer to it as transit and trails, which you'll see me talk about in a minute. This large suite of transportation funds and partners, I mean, sometimes the partnerships that we have, you can see kind of a small range of them here, are just as valuable as the money that we get. Because we get state DOTs, we get metropolitan planning organizations, we get county roads, we get other parts of the Federal Highway Administration. That's what we're going to talk about. And one of the things that Congress did in T21, which was the first transportation bill that had refuge roads money in it, and continued it in Safe TLU, which is the one we're operating under now, is they changed the rules drastically. I like to say, nature and physics, because we can take our refuge roads money, which is federal highways money, right? And we can match that with other federal highways money. And we can also take Fish and Wildlife Service money and match it with federal highways money. That's federal money and federal money. We can use it as I love this term, the non-federal match. It's true, it's really true. It freaks people out. I had to send fact sheets to Federal Highway Administration division offices to prove that I wasn't crazy. No one's really able to prove I'm not crazy, but other people think so. So some of the federal highway funds that we are eligible for are transportation enhancements, scenic byways, recreational trails, and public land highway discretionary. And every one of those that help open up a refuge. The picture you see there is above Pacific City, Oregon, on the Stucco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, and from right to left? Left to right, I'm dyslexic. We have Don Graff of Oregon Coast, the mayor, I forget the gentleman's name, he's the mayor of Pacific City, Oregon, which is out behind you. You can see a haystack rock in the distance. Refuge Supervisor Linda Waters is now retired. Roy Lowe, who many of you have probably met, the project leader for the Oregon Coast, who's very active in getting enhancement money. Pat Fisher from the Oregon Department of Transportation, and Roxanne's boss, Clara Connor, the division engineer of the Western Federal Land Highway Division. So let's look at that, talk about partnerships. And the Stucco Bay, I used to work for Roy back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and this was open for the first time for public visitation on an unlimited basis because of transportation enhancements monies. And Oregon liked the project so much, they gave us $200,000 more than we asked for. Where does that happen, folks? Okay, and also, we do go after Federal Transit Administration money. I know there's just some people in here who've gotten Sarbanes money, eventually, from the Federal Transit Administration. And again, these are essential parts of Fish and Wildlife Service, the transit and trails part of it, because these are ways that people can connect our refuges without cars. And there's a larger amount, a percentage of people that we're trying to reach out to, especially in minority and urban and suburban populations that don't have vehicles, or where transportation cost is the second highest cost in a household. It's not just urban folks, it's rural folks too. When you're driving a pickup truck that doesn't get good gas mileage and maybe is not so new, that's a big cost. And so how do we get kids, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, they come out for a nice EE, environmental education visit, and they go back to mommy and daddy and say, hey, let's go out to the refuge. How? Maybe they don't have a car, maybe they don't have the time, maybe they don't have a good car to get out there. Anyway, so there's some issues we'll talk about later. And I want to introduce the wide, wonderful world of trails, because that's another way people get around and to refuges. And to talk more about that wide, wonderful world, we have Gary Werner.
Thank you, Nathan. And I am here to talk a little bit about the context that you're already been hearing about, i.e. trails in refuges. But I'm also here to talk to you, to expand the horizon a little bit, to tell you about a sister system to the wildlife refuge system, and that is the National Trail System. The ways I want you to think about the trails are, yes, you can think about a tread that someone can walk on to see wildlife or whatever, or maybe it's an historic set of ruts that people use to transport themselves, or are left the remnants of how people transported themselves across the country 150 years ago. But, and that's fine, that's part of it, but I want you to also think in terms of the vision document for the wildlife refuge system. And the vision document talks about connecting beyond the refuges. It talks about large landscape conservation. It talks about partnerships with lots of other entities and organizations. You should have at your place two documents. One is this map brochure, the National Trail System, and the second one, which is more actually directly related to how the trail system relates to the wildlife refuge system. And as I'm summarizing here, the National Trail System includes 11 national scenic trails, 19 national historic trails, each one authorized by Congress. These are trails that are administered by your sister agencies, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the U.S. Forest Service. They extend over 53,000 miles through 49 states. And the quiz question is, can you figure out which is the state that does not have a national scenic or historic trail? That's one reason for the map. They also, among other things, pass through 70 of the national wildlife refuges, 24 national parks and monuments, and 39 other national preserves, and over 90 wilderness areas. So I want you to imagine these trails, like I said, not just as treads and ruts, but think of them as corridors of land authorized by Congress that can serve as eco-corridors, that can serve as travelways for wildlife as well as for people. And clearly they can serve as ways to connect people to the refuges. This is the map that you see, that you have in front of you. And we're trying to show, with the National Trail, Scenic and Historic Trails, we cross all of the kinds of jurisdictions that the federal government administers, state government agencies, and local agencies. And we're trying to capture with this map some sense of the ability of these trails to connect and link together these important places. Here quickly, as I mentioned, our trails go through 70 of the wildlife refuges, and I think one of the stellar examples of that is with the Florida National Scenic Trail, which extends for 92 miles through the St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge on the Gulf of Mexico coast in the panhandle of Florida. And it's important that the trail goes through the refuge, but it's just as important that the trail extends beyond the refuge, offering opportunities to get beyond the refuge boundaries with the work that you're trying to accomplish in the refuge. Here's what the trail may look like in part on the St. Mark's in some places. Very different kind of landscape than we have here in Wisconsin. And it's a place that you might see a kind of critter that we don't have here in this part of the country, and we don't have, I don't think, Tracy, I don't think we have them outside of, or Terry, I mean outside of Florida, right? Pardon? Okay. Any rate, I will be back in the second half of the program to tell you a bit more about how we actually work in partnership at the local level on the scenic and historic trails, but I have to pass the baton on to our cleanup runner, so to speak, Roxanne.
Thank you very much. And as they were saying, I'm from the Federal Highways Administration, Federal Lands Highways. That's the wonderful arm of Federal Highways that gets to work in all of these beautiful places, the national parks, wildlife refuges, and forests, and BLM lands. And what I'm basically here to do this week is to listen to what the Fish and Wildlife Service's vision is, and to better understand their vision, because when it comes down to it, our vision for the Federal Highways, Federal Lands offices are to support the Fish and Wildlife Service's vision with creating a transportation system that is appropriate to what is needed on the refuge system, as well as the other federal lands and tribal lands. So our mission is to improve that transportation system within federal and tribal lands and provide technical services to the highway community. Well, it's actually to the whole transportation community. I think we need to update our statement there, because we tend to work multimodal, meaning with all types of ways of getting to and around places, using air, planes, trains, automobiles, footpath, bicycles, all of it, buses. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you just right up front here is that I've learned quite a bit this week already from your visioning statements and the things that I've heard and the conversations I've had with different folks across the country. And I'm matching up some of the things that we can provide to you all. We already provide some of our expertise in transportation planning, as well as the design and construction of actual projects, and even some of the maintenance and research done to help with that maintenance and other construction issues. I noticed that you were all talking about working at conserving at a landscape level. Well, that's where we can engage and help you with working at a landscape level to look at the transportation systems, at not just within the refuge, but outside the refuge, in the county roads and the state DOTs and all of the partners that we traditionally work with, and we also traditionally work with you, and we can bring those together and help facilitate that conversation. And I was also very impressed with all of the emphasis on good science, making sure that all of the decisions you make and the management that you do for conserving the resources out there are based in good science. Well, we actually have some very good scientists working for the Federal Highways Administration as well, with our Turner Fairbanks office. And I can match up some of your scientists with some of our scientists to have some really good interactions and dialogues on things that you are all concerned about that interact with the transportation system, animal vehicle collisions and other things that vegetation, revegetation and things like that that we already work on that we can even strengthen further. And of course, as Steve was saying, we bring funding to the table. We have money that Congress has allocated to the federal lands that they pass through Federal Highways Administration and that we oversee and pass on to Steve to dole out to all of those regions. So when we were having our conversations with Secretary Salazar this morning, we were talking about how the Friends groups are very helpful and very supportive in the conservation initiatives on all of the wildlife refuges out there, and that you can further assist the refuges by thinking about the transportation bill as well. So when your congressional folks come home and are talking to you and listening to you, you might want to emphasize not only the conservation aspects of their funding for the Department of Interior, but also the funding that comes through the Department of Transportation for the Department of Interior and all of those public lands that we all enjoy. So I'm going to pass it back over to Steve to tell us about that game. What are we going to do with those tickets? And they're not drink tickets, right, Steve?
Not for those folks. No, okay, thanks, Roxanne. We need everyone in the room to participate in this, and with the tickets, so please help out, including Majora Carter. Thank you very much for stopping by before you head out of town. What we put on the screen here are 6 different areas where we work in using transportation dollars for some type of improvement. And before you, and don't steal the other tickets around you, just use the 4 tickets that you have, and just use 4. And we're gonna, what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask you to prioritize and using your 4 tickets, each as a funding unit, and how would you spend that ticket, or that each one of those tickets as a funding unit across those 6 areas. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up the center aisle and collect by number the tickets that you want to contribute. So the people on the end aisles play a critical role here of collecting the tickets for your line. And so we'll give you just a minute to think about it. Yes, Majora? Yes, you may. You have each one of those tickets is a funding unit. You can decide where to place that ticket.
You can put all your eggs in one
You
basket.
can put, very good question. Okay, so let's go ahead and what we're going to do is we're going to collect the tickets, and the surveys are there. We're not going to collect those right now, so we'll collect them at the end, but please take time to do that as well. So we're going to go ahead with number 1. So those who want to add tickets, any ticket to number 1.
Actually, I have 1 and 2, so tell me if you want.
Okay. No, I think Roxanne, just 1. And 1 is improved travel information with technology, wayfinding, and signs. Thank you. Okay, Roxanne's moving back for number 1. Now someone is going to start with number 2, or she has number 2 in her hand. Yes. Hold on. Okay, so it's just like federal highways to grab all the tickets and the money and run. Okay, so any number 1s? Okay, now we're going to move to number 2. You're going to come let's start from the front. Okay, number 2 now, which is improved general road conditions. So it could be repaving, rehabbing, resurfacing, et cetera. They have it. Okay, we're gonna start number 3, which is improved parking, either the amount of parking or the condition of the parking. Number 3, now coming from the front of the front of the room. Okay, number 4 starting, which is improving travel options, which we called alternative transportation, which more rightfully called traditional transportation. But so include trails, transit, other options. That's what's coming. Nathan has that coming up from the front. And we're keeping track of those numbers, correct? Okay, number 5, Jeff Mast. You guys are killing me. Thank you. Do one at a time, one at a time. This is number 4. Last call for number 4. Last call. No drink tickets. Okay, Nathan has number 5 also. He's going to start number 5, which is improve environmental conditions in the transportation system. So it could be improving fish passage by building a culvert that allows that, wildlife overpasses, things like that, better drainage, stormwater management, things like that. And last but not least, and I may have done this on purpose, coming up now with Jeff Mast is safety, improving safety in the transportation or road network. All right. Uh-oh, one more in the back, Thad. Well, thank you very much. That was meant to be a little bit of a break after some presentations as an overview. And we gave you some content to think about those items in the context of our program here and looking ahead. Now we're going to now we're going to ask Roxanne to count the tickets, so she'll be doing that here and so forth. Please do the surveys as well. We'll collect them at the end. Please consider that. But now we're going to move into a little more detail on a couple items, and I believe we're going to have Nathan start off here and talk a little bit more detail about funding sources related to transit trails and other items. Right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I apologize. It is Jeff first.
Believe it or not, that picture was taken just last week. I did get a haircut before I came here. I'm sort of going to fly through this stuff because I'm going to talk to you right now about basically how we choose our refuge roads projects at the regional level and then how they sort of progress. I'm going to give you a couple examples of projects, but I think we really want to save some time for the grant programs because I think a lot of people in here are probably more interested in that. So largely we choose these projects based on regional priority and need, and that sort of arises just out of conversations, talking with refuge staff, talking in the regional office, and then also looking at the condition assessments that we do every 4 years with federal highways, where they go out and they look at every road in the system and say what kind of condition it is for each segment. So using that, we come up with sort of a priority as to which roads need to find their way into the program. But that can't just be it. We also have to look at safety. If there's a safety issue somewhere on the system, that's really not acceptable for us, so we have to find a way to overcome that. Cost is definitely a limiting factor. We have a few roads in the system that are so big we just can't fit them into the program, so we have to think about that. And then emergencies do come up, so we have to pad it a little bit just in case we need to find some funding for something that can't wait 5 years. So to give you an idea of one of our bigger projects that we've done in Region 5 recently, this is the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge in Virginia Beach, Virginia, entrance road. This project was just finished this May, so it's brand new. It was in very poor condition. It's a 1.2 mile road that leads from the entrance gate up to the visitor center where there are 2 parking lots. You can't tell in the picture right there too well, but it's before we did the project. And then there's actually some bicyclists in the center of the road, if you can look way in the distance. We did some resurfacing, widening, and some minor geometric improvements to improve the roadway. And then there was those safety considerations because this does connect Virginia Beach to the refuge, and there are pedestrians who are walking down the road and they didn't really have any infrastructure to make it safe for them. And when you see that project cost, $1.3 million, we have a $1.7 million yearly budget. I mean, that's a big hit for us. So it took a few years of putting aside money to make this project happen. And here's the finished product. Looks slightly different. It was completed this May. It's a much better visitor experience coming into the refuge with this. And looking at the striped shoulders, the bicyclists and the pedestrians who are coming to the visitor center feel much safer. And that's something we really want to accomplish, especially in a place like Virginia Beach where we have such opportunities. A much different kind of project. This is at Wapak National Wildlife Refuge in New Hampshire. And this is one of our smaller refuges. And this is a project that's it's in the works, but it sort of displays how a safety issue can really turn into a project, and then how also a local government can help get a project going, and CCPs. So this is a very popular hiking spot in this area of New Hampshire, and there's no parking area at the refuge. And so as you can see in the picture, cars are just parking on the side of the road, and it's presenting pretty much a safety issue because people are getting out of their cars, walking in the roadway, and cars are coming by. And when it's really bad is in the winter when snowplows are trying to go by and the snow is banked on that side of the road. So the cars are basically impeding the ability of the town to provide a safe roadway. So the Refuge CCP identified this as a priority to have a parking lot somewhere at Wapak. And because of the safety issues associated with it, we could use Refuge Roads planning funds to figure out a way to devise some plans for it. And here are those plans. So you can't really tell too well, but the dotted heavy line is actually a new trail segment that's going to go over to that new parking lot. So we're actually moving the trailhead along the roadway to the parking lot. And one of the nice things about that, it's a 15-space paved parking lot. And it's also just across the road from that parking lot is a trail to a children's camp. So it's going to provide 2 connections and allow those children to be able to get onto the refuge and experience the National Wildlife Refuge, which is fantastic. So this is where we are at this point. The town, we are waiting for a letter from them saying basically it's a safety issue and we're hoping to move forward with the project. But this is something that hopefully we can go to construction this year, and if not this year, hopefully next year. So that's 2 quick projects for you. Now I'm going to move on to Nathan.
In many areas of the country, this is a real program, by the way, the reverse commute program that gets people, flowing against the people generally going, like in our case, going into DC, but a lot of people want to start moving from DC out, reverse commute. Well, this is one way we're dealing with the effects of climate change. This will also be a very important part of our urban refuge strategy. Warehouse, we've got to provide safe haven for the animals at night, right? And we are working very closely with our partners at the EPA for clean water issues, clean air issues for our constituents here, and also with HUD, Housing and Development, to find suitable homes, in neighborhoods for our animals. So, by the way, this is if I get the Washington Post office. This is a cartoon called Speed Bump, and I saw this. I said I just had to have this. So, anyway. Okay, that's wonderful. How do we do that? I don't know. I hit the wrong button. Story of my life. I just go through it really fast. Okay, everybody. Here's Gary's. Yeah, really. Okay, here we go. I know the right button to hit at least. Okay, some people in the room are talking about the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks Program. It's an unfortunate name. It was originally the Alternative Transportation Program for Parks and Public Lands. But the guy who wanted to make this happen was Paul Sarbanes, a now retired senator from Maryland. And so in 2007, Congress renamed it Transit and the Parks Program, and I said, and other public lands. There are $27 million this year in the TRIP, or the Sarbanes program. And you notice, in FY12, who knows? Along with the other budget issues, the transportation bill, to authorize the new Surface Transportation Act, we don't know when that's going to come out. There's been some movement about it, but stay tuned. And you heard what Steve said. Contact and inform your local congressional delegation about how you feel about transportation and how it affects National Wildlife Refuges. This is through the Federal Transit Administration. The other programs that you heard about were through the Federal Highways Administration. This is through FTA, and it does include other agencies as well. And over the years that we've participated, we've gotten $13.2 million so far, which is, again, not a whole lot of money. The Park Service gets the bulk of it for good reason. This year, though, 19 Fish and Wildlife Service projects were submitted for FY12 funds. That closed in May. We'll be evaluating them in September. I've just started my part. We have 105 total in the program, and it's a truly interagency group. Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, Forest Service, Federal Transit Administration, Federal Highway Administration. We all review all the projects and send a recommended list on up to the Secretary of the Interior, who gets to decide which projects to fund. Some examples, we've done some work at Chincoteague with both studies and hard projects. They're in the middle of a contract now for a bikeway. Joe McCauley is in the room. He recognizes the picture with the boat. What is that boat in the middle of the field? That boat is going down the James River. Why do I have it up there? There's a small ferry, you'll see off the starboard side of the boat there, that connects to Presque Isle National Wildlife Refuge. We were awarded $200,000 to study where and how to improve this ferry service, so we're not dealing with this, and so we can safely, once again, get visitors out to Presque Isle National Wildlife Refuge. That's one of the aspects. Another one is it's just opening up out in Wyoming. That's actually the National Elk Refuge. You see that person bicycling. The National Elk Refuge, that actual boundary goes up to North Highway 89, not just north of Jackson, Wyoming. The bulk of the refuge is off to the right. That's also paid for with Sarbanes money. It's got to be, non-motorized transportation has to accomplish the same things as motorized transportation has to. Transit has to relieve congestion, lower pollution, contribute to public health, all that kind of good stuff. And then, did you know, here's a trivia question, what agency has the only all-electric tram working, taking visitors around a refuge? Fish and Wildlife Service, that's us. We have the only all-electric tram, and that's it right now. Everybody's heard of DARPA, right? That mysterious Defense Department research thing that creates all this kind of weird stuff that really works. That was one. And they just gave it to the refuge, and the company who made it went out of business. So one of the things we are working with is trying to keep this one running, and then see if there's a market for someone to build stuff like this so we can go to GSA. That's Patuxent Research Refuge in Laurel, Maryland, just north of DC. Okay, we're going to move on. Transit and trails. This is a study that we did with Sarbanes money, with the Volpe Center. We call them our friendly Volpians, up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They're part of the Research and Innovative Technology Administration in DOT. And what they did was, I changed the money on them, instead of inventorying all of our alternative transportation systems, I said, well, how can we get to refuges without cars? And you can. There's a bus that goes almost to Caldwell, that's one picture, and the other one is the bike riders to Chincoteague. And they developed a methodology to do this, create a priority list of refuges that are already doing this, or with very minimal work can make that happen. They give a good findings and recommendations, and this is really based on, I talked about transportation, I didn't say the words transportation equity, but that's what we have to look for. If we really want to get minority, underfunded, underserved, poor people out to refuges, this is the way we can do it, because they don't have cars. Or like I said, if they have cars and not in really good condition, it costs them a lot of money to do it. What good is it we get some kids out to EE programs, which we do wonderfully, we do great interpretation, but if they can't get back there, have we really connected them to nature? I mean, this is really connecting people to nature. How do we do that without cars if we can? It goes a long way for our greenhouse gas emissions, as Chris Stewart's in the back there with our climate leadership and refuges tool. America's Great Outdoors has access, and urban refuges, and getting urban populations out to our lands. How can we do that? We can do it also in all 4 of our refuge types. We have urban refuge, we have suburban refuges, we have rural and remote. And there can be a role for this in all of them. Yes, Steve's telling me to fly like an eagle and zip through this. Soar. I don't have to move my wings. Federal Highway Administration Scenic Byways Program. Some of you are on refuges that are along scenic byways. $40,500,000 this year. What's next year? These are DOT designations. 81 refuges are along 46 of them in 31 states. There's a grant program that we can use our money as match, as I pointed out, but this is a weird restriction. We can only use cash. So you got to have the money. You can't do in-service or donations. Friends groups can, but refuges can't, and then all other land management agencies too. You can see what you can use them for. It's a pretty broad range. We got a fish hatchery out in Wisconsin, well, here in Wisconsin, that's just got over $1 million for a visitor center from this program. There's money there, people, and we can help you get it. Corridor planning, too, is very important. All scenic byways have to have corridor management plans. If they're state designated, I worked on one out in Oregon with Malheur Refuge many years ago, and the first one that actually was centered in our refuge and put in by Refuge is Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma. Wichita Mountains National Scenic Byway. The administrator of Federal High Administration looked at me weirdly when I picked up their plaque. He said, Fish and Wildlife Service? He just thought we're the people that stand in the way of like ES. This is the big kahuna here. That is almost $1 billion in transportation enhancements monies that went out this year, a portion to the state DOTs. The current House version of this program, of highway bill, has no money for this at all, or that the states decide exactly how to spend it. You can see it's a broad range of stuff, mostly bike ped facilities. You can actually buy scenic easements and sites with this. When I talked about Nestucca Bay, it was enhancement money there. Steigerwald Lake was opened up with this. 10,000 Islands, Thad. 10,000 Islands opened this up with some refuge roads money, enhancement money and roads money. to get people out to that refuge for the first time safely off the Tamiami Trail, which is not a very safe place for cars and people without cars. Anyway, a wide range of stuff. We really like to start working on environmental mitigations and wildlife crossings. More Defenders of Wildlife is trying, there's $64 million they figure they're leaving on the table by not applying for that. Really good example down at Eastern Shore. We stepped up and were able to get an award that was given to Northampton County. We were able to finish the project because they couldn't, and we were able to transfer money from them to us. And it's a beautiful rail trail, actually, on the Eastern Shore. And Rec Trails program, the same way, $97 million. And this is one that was zeroed out by Representative Micah's transportation enhancement, transportation infrastructure bill that came before the House just recently. Wide range of eligible uses. Again, we can use our money as match. So you can see all the stuff that you can do with this. So it's a wide range of stuff. And I'm going to turn this over to Gary, and Gary can give some examples of other kinds of funding in use that he applies locally. Gary.
Okay, back to the National Scenic and Historic Trails, and back to your vision document. You've talked about in there about urban refuges and connecting locally to people at home. The National Trails system is predicated on public-private partnerships. There are federal agencies involved, but the trails only exist because of nonprofit organizations, the organizations I represent. They're the analogs of you people in the Wildlife Refuge Friends organizations. In 2010, our volunteers all across the country contributed over 1.1 million hours of volunteer labor, about $24 million worth of labor for the National Trail System. So the trails also, besides connecting through 70 of your wildlife refuges that are oftentimes in fairly remote places, also go through 100 of the metropolitan areas in the country over 50,000 population. So they provide direct opportunity to connect to people locally. They involve lots of different local agencies and local groups as well as federal groups, and they can provide those critical linkages, again, to the refuges and to the cities. And to go, yeah. I want to bring you right here an example right here at close to home for me here in Madison. The Ice Age National Scenic Trail is one of those 11 scenic trails, travels for about 1,000 miles through the state of Wisconsin, following the moraines and other deposits of the Ice Age glaciers. And it is a project of these partners, primarily the National Park Service and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources throughout the state, the Ice Age Trail Alliance, the nonprofit organization, but here in Dane County, the Dane County Parks. This is the map of the Dane County Parks and Open Space Plan. It's pretty busy and difficult to see. You can locate yourself here at Monona Terrace on the north shore of Lake Monona, and you can, by the trail that goes past, if maybe you've been on it, past the Monona Terrace, you can actually get out to the Ice Age Trail. But this is also in the Parks and Open Space Plan. This highlights the trails. The Ice Age Trail Corridor is right at the western edge of the city of Madison. Our population is about 250,000. The county as a whole, 500,000. The area you see in this map that's shown in green running north and south is about 1.5 mile long corridor that's 1/2 to 3/4 mile wide that carries the Ice Age National Scenic Trail as a hiking and cross-country ski trail and a bicycle trail that was a multi-use bicycle trail that was paid for with some of the funding that Nathan's been telling you about, and that all links into the cross-state bicycle trail system that runs right past Monona Terrace here. And there we go. But as I said before, you've got to think of these trails not just as transportation ways, but as eco corridors. This is one to the south of us here in Dane County. This is the Ice Age Trail Corridor. This is actually that map I just showed you of that green space on there. This is a 450-acre restored tallgrass prairie. 15 years ago, what you see there was cornfield. Now it's prairie that supports bobolink, dickcissel, and other grassland birds. It also accommodates in these corridors a wide range of recreational uses. Our most popular dog walking park in Dane County is at Prairie Moraine County Park on the Ice Age Trail, but there's also a population of native lupin on the terminal moraine in a remnant bur oak savanna that you see on the left there. This is jumping back to Florida and St. Mark's. You know, to do these trails, I mentioned our volunteers, but we also partner with the Student Conservation Association, other organizations involving young people. This was a project building part of that Florida National Scenic Trail at St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, which of course would not have happened without the strong support of the refuge manager, Terry Peacock, and her staff. We're involved in all of the kinds of restoration activities to restore native ecosystems and maintain them. Here in the upper Midwest, we primarily were prairie and oak savanna at the time of white settlement. And so along the Ice Age Trail, we're rescuing oaks that are 150 or 200 years old. And as I mentioned, we're planting new prairie on land that's been purchased for the trail. It's been in agriculture for the last 150 years. We work with all levels of government here. We also work with some of the programs like the Dane County Neighborhood Intervention Program. It's a program to intervene in the lives of otherwise at-risk youth, to get them outdoors doing constructive activities and show them some other possibilities in life. And yes, we do a lot of our work in the wintertime as much as in the summertime. We've worked with that program for about 7 or 8 years now. We collect prairie seeds. The Dane County Parks Naturalist has a White House recognized program for the last 30 years of working with school children and old and retired adults to collect seeds that we then clean and plant a new prairie. I was with him one day when a little girl, maybe 10 years old, came up to him and said, "My mother helped you when she was a little girl." So those are the kind of programs for engaging youth. This is a section of land north of Madison that was purchased by Dane County Parks for the Ice Age Trail. You can see it's been in agriculture. We're planting prairie on top of corn stubble. This weekend we'll be out there weeding the prairie, taking the weeds out, which is something we have to do. This one just illustrates that we go through 2 state wildlife areas with the Ice Age Trail here in Dane County. So we've got your counterparts at the state level who we work with. And in this environment, like in Florida, our ecosystems are all fire-dependent ecosystems. And so we burn them when we can in the spring. The crew that you see there are all volunteers. They have all been trained according to the NWCG standards, and we conduct the burns through our corridors. Oops. Oftentimes, the Ice Age Trail is the fire break. And of course, what that does is promote this, the kind of prairie that we can enjoy for recreation and supports a lot of the wildlife that otherwise would not live here and are threatened. And bringing the circle all the way back around to Florida, this is the beacon at St. Mark's for ships. I heard Secretary Salazar this morning talk about all of us being a beacon of hope, and I think that was a wonderful, wonderful metaphor. So, Roxanne, you're up.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. And as we heard, we have lots of stuff that Federal Highways is doing, as well as with the partner agencies and through the funding mechanisms, working with Jeff Mass and the other refuge road coordinators, bringing projects to your refuges and helping you with the planning efforts there. And speaking of the planning efforts, we have some of the big initiatives that we're working on creating in partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the federal lands offices, is creating long-range transportation planning, strategic planning at a regional level as well as at the national level. And we've just completed a couple of plans at the regional level for Region 1, which is the Pacific Northwest and the states up there. We have them as the pilot for a long-range transportation plan, helping to identify all of the needs of a multiple state region with lots of refuges, lots of transportation needs out there, but just that small pot of money that Steve provides to the regions themselves, and having to make some pretty tough choices as to where to spend that next transportation dollar. So that's what that strategic planning documents help to describe, the what's important to the region, what the conditions are out there, what the needs are out there, and then how they're going to decide on those spending. And then at the national level, we're helping Steve look at folding in all of the regional long-range transportation plans and the needs out there, and the national priorities of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and how to speak to Congress about all of the need, the great need that's out there across the country for the transportation system, and help to identify that and articulate that, and then also look for strategies to meet those needs across the country. So what else are we doing? Linking up our vision with your vision, definitely we were talking about that. And you know, we're talking about the big long-range transportation plans, but we also work on unit-specific. If you have a transportation issue that you know you've got a problem out there and you're not quite sure what the solution is, then you can work with your roads coordinators and some of our expertise at federal lands, federal highways, to bring to bear to do some studying and looking at different alternatives and what might be the best answer for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and we're going to help describe that exercise that you did and how that might contribute to helping decide what's the priorities of you all in this agency, and what should be thought about when we're looking at those long-range transportation plans. Want to bring that board up, or is that now time? Good.
Thanks, Roxanne. I guess I'm standing between you all and the call to action downstairs that's going to happen at 3 o'clock. But I'm going to go through a few slides here to wrap up, and then we'll have time for question and answers. But the exercise that we did earlier on here with the tickets was to show you the 6 areas of that we use transportation dollars to do improvements in the refuge system. And I realize we kind of pushed you a little bit on that, and I think if we gave you a little more time to think, the results may have been a little different, perhaps with the last item related to safety. But because I think I noticed some people said, well, I don't have any more tickets for the safety cup as it came around. But nonetheless, I think we got some interesting results. And I think the distribution, and perhaps we stress trails and transit some in this presentation, or that may be what you have interest in, frankly, and that's great. But clearly that was the item that got the most tickets distributed. And then following after that is a grouping of traveler information, signs, improving road conditions, and then the environmental conditions related to roads and transportation. And this little exercise that we did really helps us in our planning efforts. I mean, I know this is a group of a mixture of friends, refuge staff, a national office, other stakeholders here. But it gives us a sense for when we're working on the planning activities that Roxanne mentioned, where we need to highlight items, where we need to work harder to plan for the future, and then look closely at how that links to the vision that we've been working on here in the last few days. Just a summary slide of the title of this presentation has been related to friends and friendship and sort of getting to know each other and knowing the opportunities that are out there for transportation. And I boiled it down to 3 levels. One is at the regional level or Washington office staff. We need to be aware of what we're doing in our program, both from a planning standpoint and then strategically implementing items into the future. And that involves coordinating at various levels, and we're starting to do that, and we're going to do more of it. At the refuge level or field station level, sort of awareness that transportation plays into the bigger picture of your surroundings. Certainly at the landscape level, we touched on that briefly here in this presentation, but also on the planning and transportation planning levels that others are doing out there. Those things affect us, and we need to engage in that as much as we can. With resources perhaps being static or going downhill, that's going to make it harder, and you're already busy and engaged in operations inside the boundaries, but we all need to be aware of what's happening outside. And then friends and stakeholders, can't say enough about the continued support and advocacy that you bring forward to us. It's greatly appreciated, and please let us know how we can help. We also need to know your ideas and things that are out there that, you know, I don't necessarily need to hear them in the national office, but certainly at the station level, which can be funneled up to folks like Jeff and his counterparts. They need to know these things, and they'll work hard to figure out ways to help make things happen. And this is more of a personal summary. You know, we tried to stay away from jargon, transportation jargony, phraseologies and stuff that we can fall into, and there's a lot there, and hopefully we didn't do too much of that here today. But you know, safety, planning, projects, funding, infrastructure, asset management, all that stuff is important for our program. It's important for the National Wildlife Refuge system. But this is what it's all about. You know, getting people out there to enjoy the National Wildlife Refuge system. That's what it's all about. But to make things like this happen, you need to have good, efficient, safe transportation so people can get there and enjoy it. So last night I hung out with DeWitt Jones over at the Capitol, and I actually took this picture with him. No, I'm kidding. I did take this picture last night, walking back from dinner, and was just struck by how many people were hanging out at the Capitol Square after the concert, and just the sky was just wonderful blue color, and saw this fountain or the planter, and just thought, I'm going to take this picture. So that's with my 3 megabyte phone that I walk around with, and thinking about Michael Gale yesterday and taking that technology on the road. But again, you still need good transportation to make that happen. Here's our contact information, and please contact us in the future if you have any questions. But thank you very much for your attention. I guess now we'll open it up for any questions, dialogue, what have you. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Yeah, come on, the survey. Yes, we need to, please complete the surveys that have been presented to you. Those will also be used as part of the planning process, so we greatly appreciate that. And let's go take just a minute to grab those now.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
No.
I've got a large voice.
There it is.
How about that?
It's
That'll
there.
just work for that?
It's there.
Rather than wait for it to, there we
Yeah.
go. All right. Couple of things. One, when you listed all of the region people up there was no one for Region 8, so I don't know who I would go for region contact there.
Yes, Jeff Holm is, the first person on the list is 1 and 8.
1 and 8, okay.
Yes.
All right, that was one question. And I think for myself, yesterday I brought up transportation issues. I'm the president of the Friends Group for 4 Southern Nevada refuges. One of them's 23 miles north of Las Vegas, and the other ones are very disparate distance from Las Vegas. And one of our biggest things is getting people from that main population center to Las Vegas, and then we have rural communities, getting them onto the refuges. And so yesterday I brought up getting the transportation issues of getting people onto the refuges. So I was told to attend this today because I brought that up yesterday and I was told to be here. So I think you guys need to listen to the tickets that were dropped today, you guys seem to be surprised by how many dropped in number 4 and not in number 6 and not in the other ones there. At least that's what it looked like to you there whenever you were saying, oh, I think we didn't explain this well enough or whatever.
Well, I'm not saying it's a scientific evaluation.
I understand
guess is
that,
what I'm saying,
but I think several of us, especially among the Friends, and I maybe Majora Carter and some of the rest of us here that have a really big community influence to try to do this, because that's what I talked with last night with Juan, who worked with us as well in Southern Nevada, to try to get the people from Winchester Cultural Center and all of that onto our refuges. I also work with the Nevada Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights, and we have several groups that come up. That is our #1 largest expense. We have to rent a bus and other transportation things to get them up there. And we spend 80% of our money to do that. And it's unbelievable that we have to do that every time.
Well, is this thing on?
So August,
Yeah, for that's becoming a much larger issue, and maybe we made a bit light of it. We were kind of surprised that so many people voted that way. But one of the things you can take advantage of, and especially when the refuges work very closely with all the other land management agencies in Las Vegas, so it's not just a fish and wildlife issue. I mean, how to get people to Lake Mead, how to get people out to Red Rocks, how to get them out to Spring Mountains. And there have been some projects from the Sarbanes program that the Forest Service has got, and I know the BLM has gotten. We haven't gotten any from Fish and Wildlife yet. We used to, maybe we can beat up on Cynthia Martinez, who used to be out there, and there she is. Hi. No, I guess she is.
that's not her.
That's not her? Darn.
The light's bright up here.
The light is bright. But that's one way you can do it. I mean, I also highly encourage you to start working with, find out who is your metropolitan planning organization. Clark County, I think, is yours. It's a huge county. They have an interesting way to distribute money, since they get all the gaming money. I'm from Nevada. I used to work in Reno. They don't get, well, there's a lot of, there's the Southern Nevada, what does SNAP stand for? I always forget.
Nevada Agency Partnership, which this
Yeah.
lady back here is a member of, and we get all that.
Yeah, well, there are ways to manipulate that to do it, but work with your transportation planners, work with the Sarbanes program, and really make it an issue of we need to get people who don't all have cars. Everybody assumes if you live in Las Vegas, you have a car. That's not necessarily true. Well, then how do we get people out to Pahranagat? How do we get people out to Ash Meadows, Moapa? So how do we get those people out there? Can you work with the tribes with their tribal transportation program? How can you start to do it? And they're not going to pay for themselves. Fare boxes don't pay for transit. You got to make that built into agency budgets somehow, and make it important. Like I said, you have to make this kind of essential. This is, natural areas are not just fun things to have. They're important for our health, our well-being, not just ourselves, but of the land. And getting there is essential on how to do that. We can't really appreciate it until you can get there. So we'd be glad to talk to you more about it. It's not something we have a quick and easy answer for. It takes working with a lot of different agencies, a lot of different groups to bring this up forward. Yeah, I mean, if we can pay school buses, for kids to go out there. It's a one-time shot, as I said. But how do you continually connect these communities who want to be connected with our resources? So no, it's not something.
Let's talk after.
Yeah, let's talk afterwards. Sorry.
Afterward.
You get me on a rant, and you don't want to hear that.
Go ahead. Any more questions, thoughts? Yes. 2011.
It's 2011. The projects will be evaluated and sent up. When we actually get those approved, we don't know yet.
Can you use the mic? I think they're trying to tape the session, please.
I'm with the Friends of Patuxent, and I just want to say thank you for trying to help us find an alternative replacement for our tram, because it's a very important part of what we do, offering that tram opportunity for our visitors to use.
Thank you. All right, I don't we'll hang around up here for a few minutes for sure, so please stop by. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate your attention in this session. And let's call to action downstairs.
Sign up.